Hey everybody, it's Evan from Method, and this little Methodcast that I'm going to do here right now, I'm just going to kind of jump right into this because it's something that I've been wanting to do for a while now. Ever since Maxwell 3 came out, and they've added spherical camera lenses, and I'm going to show you why I think that is such a cool addition to the Maxwell Render suite. And I've been a long time QuickTime VR photographer. Way back in the day when Apple had QuickTime VR Authoring Studio, I used to make and go out and shoot a ton of panoramas. And recently, this is something that's kind of been missing from my 3D tool set, and it's been something that's been really popular once I started doing it again and showing clients and getting panoramic images in their hands. I'm going to show you why I think that's such a cool thing. So here we are. This happens to be an interior space. Interior spaces work really well for panoramas because it really kind of puts you in it. It's a little bit more difficult to pull these off outdoors. They tend to work better in tighter spaces, so courtyards or in between buildings or something like that. They work pretty well for outdoors. Otherwise, there might be something to look at in maybe a 90-degree field of view, but maybe not 360. So what I really want to focus on today are 360-degree panoramas inside of a space. I'm going to show you how to set it up here. I'm using Form Z. I'm using the Maxwell plugin in here. This also works in Maxwell Studio. It should work in just about any plugin for any 3D software that you're using with Maxwell Render. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to set up a view, kind of what the parameters are, and then I'm going to show you how we actually use this. And I'm going to show you a very cool iPad app that's really inexpensive, where you can really put this in your client's hands and show them how to do it. So here we are inside this space, and you can see that this space has kind of been modeled all 360 degrees. And I have a bunch of lights in here as well because it is an indoor space. I don't have any physical sky or any exterior environmental lighting happening. And you can tell what I have set up as lights because I have the face normals set up so I can make sure that they're all pointing the right direction. So if I click on this light, for instance, and select it, you see there's a little arrowhead coming off, and that's called a normal, and it just shows which way the polygon is pointing. I talked about that in my emitter lighting for Maxwell Render before, so go back and check out that video. I'll put a link to it underneath this one. But in Form Z, if you go into the Attributes panel down here, there's a little checkbox here for Show Face Normal. So you can turn that on for certain objects, and what I do is I turn those on for all of my lights. Well, most of them. You can see here's a few here just kind of hanging out, and if I just quickly select those and say show face normals, there they are. And I like to do that just to remind me that they're all going the right direction, so there's no surprises. Hopefully you know by now that if they are pointing the wrong direction, light will not emit from them in the rendering. The other thing that I have set up for this is multi-light, and the reason I do that is because I don't want to tweak all my light levels now. You can see there's so many lights in here. It would be kind of a lot of tedious work to go through and select every light and assign an intensity to it. Instead, I have all of these different materials over here, and it's all the same material, but the difference is if I go into my material parameters, you can see I've labeled them so I know which ones are my upper lights, which ones are my spotlights. Those are the ones up in this, behind this glass up here. I've got this one here for my strip cove lights. And so everywhere that I have a different set of lights that I want to be able to control intensity later, I just duplicate the material, rename it, and apply it to that emitter geometry. And again, the reason I do that is so that I can go back in multi-light, and I'll get more into that in probably a future video, but I can control the lighting after I've done the rendering or during when the rendering's happening, and I don't have to keep tweaking and adjusting and tweaking, adjusting, and re-rendering. I can do it all with a single render, and it's a really cool technology that Maxwell has. So again, that's called multi-light. And so I'm going to show you now kind of how to set up a view. So in Form Z, we have Edit Cone of Vision, which is Command E on the Mac or Control E on PC. And what I'm going to do here is move my camera kind of into a good position for a panorama. Now, there's only a couple things you really have to know about this. Number one is you should have your camera be flat in the viewport. So if I zoom in on this view down here, in Form Z they have a separate interface here for just manipulating the field of view. So none of the objects can be selected in these. It's just for cameras. So you could do this in the main modeling window, but if you want real precision, you want to come into the Vision editor. So if I click in this window, you can see I can zoom in and control what's happening over here. And I can grab this camera and move it around, and you can see it's manipulating the view right here. All right, so what I'm going to do is just set up kind of an initial viewpoint of where I want the camera to be when I'm looking at the panorama. So the most important part is the eye point. Where do you want to be when you're standing in the room? Do you want to be on the stage? Right, so I can move the eye point up to the stage, and I could swing the field of view back around. So if I did this, you can see if I just kind of spin this around, I'm standing in the stage, and that isn't necessarily the perfect view for this this tutorial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move myself back and kind of out over the center of the seating and zoom in a little bit here and try to kind of center myself in the room. It's not super important, but again, you only get this one chance to kind of set where you're standing in the space when you do this. So a good thing to do is kind of set it up in the top view, then click down here in the side view, flatten this thing out, okay? And the best way to do this, to actually flatten this out, is in my view parameters over here. And I can actually type in the numbers, okay? So my Z, right now I'm 8'9" in the air, so let's just go to 9 feet in the air and go to my center of interest and set that to be the same. So the Z coordinate in Form Z is up and down, it's vertical. And so now I'm 9 foot up in the air looking perfectly flat. And that's important because when I spin around a 360, I want to make sure that there's no weird angles happening there. All right. Again, top view, just make sure you're set up to be looking fairly straight. It doesn't matter. This is just kind of where the middle of your rendering is going to be. So it's not super important. You could be looking any direction. The main things that you want to set right now is where you're standing and get that horizontal view flat. All right. Once you've got that set up, there's only a couple more things you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Oh, real quick, because we're using Maxwell Render and it is manipulating or it is mimicking a real-world camera, you want to set your focal point to kind of be somewhere in the space that makes sense. So depending on the camera settings you're using, if you have the focal point really far away, you might have problems with blurriness because you might be focusing on something really far away. So again, just set your focal distance about the distance that it should be inside the space, depending on the camera settings you're using. So that might take a little bit of trial and error with that. All right. Once you've got that, you can go out, close out of the cone of vision. Before, what we have to do before rendering, that is we want to go under Display, Image Options, and you want to make sure that the rendering is a 2:1 ratio. Okay, so that's what Maxwell Render is expecting with a spherical camera lens. Right? So a good number to use, 3000 by 1500. Again, this really depends on how long you're willing to wait for that rendering to happen. So a good number is 4096 by 2048. I like that number, and you'll see why here in a little bit, because I am going to be doing this on an iPad with a Retina screen. The natural resolution of that image is 2048 by 2048. So if I were to have a square image, that would look perfect on an iPad screen. So this will give me a little bit of extra room. You can go 3000 by 1500. Again, it doesn't matter. It's just up to you what you want to do. And I'm going to go ahead and do that just to speed things up a little bit. It's going to take less time to render a 3000 image than it is a 4000. So 2:1 ratio here. So you probably need to uncheck maximize window and screen, because if you don't, it's going to use a proportion of that screen. So type those numbers in. Click OK. All right. Now let's go to our display options. I already have the palette on the screen, but if you don't, it's under Display, Display Options, F9. Okay. And clicking on the Maxwell Render display options, let's just go through these tabs real quick and make sure that this is set up correctly. So I want it to launch in Maxwell Render. Okay. Now at this point, you could send it to Studio if you wanted to and do the same thing. So if you're using a plugin in a application that doesn't have the spherical lens, I'll show you where that is in a minute, you might want to just go ahead and send it over to Studio at this point. All right. You want to go ahead and set up your quality and performance. So I'm going to set my sampling level here as at 18. I want to make sure it gets to 18 before it times out. So you can set the time level much higher, whatever you want it to be. And again, this is in minutes. So This way I'm basically ensuring that it's going to get to 18 SLs. The higher the number, the longer it takes, and you can always stop at any time. So this will just keep the rendering cranking away and developing until it hits one of these numbers first, and then it stops. All right. Let's see. I don't think there's anything else here that I need. Yeah, multi-light, that's important because I want to be able to control the intensity of my lighting after the fact. So I have multi-light turned on. By default, this is turned off. Okay? And so if this is turned off, whatever my emitter materials are set to, or my lighting is set to in my lights palette, is what I'm going to get no matter what. This will make a larger file, but I think it's totally worth it. I can have a scene where the house lights are up in this theater. I can have a scene where the house lights are down. You'll see in a minute here what I'm talking about. All right, so intensity turned on. Image, I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I have the render. In this particular image, I don't need an alpha channel because I have no background that's going to be dropped in later. So you may want to have that. You may want to have any one of these channels turned on depending on your rendering. So that's up to you. Camera. Okay, so again, f-stop and shutter really depends on the camera that you want to use inside this space. We don't need to talk about that now. I've covered that in other videos. Lens, right here. This is where we want to make sure we're telling it to use a spherical lens. If you don't do that now, I'm just going to get a standard rendering of what I see right in the screen. All right, so you can see they've added a bunch of different options in the latest version of Maxwell, version 3, that weren't in here before, with the exception of I think Pinhole's new as well. So all this stuff is new and it's covered in the manual. So make sure you read up on those. But I'm going to choose Spherical. And if you don't choose Spherical, again, you're only going to get a straight rendering. You'll notice that when I switch that, my viewport doesn't actually change. And that's because it only happens at render time. When all the light and all the image bends through a spherical lens, you'll see what happens when we send this to Maxwell. All right, the last one, I'm not going to do anything with the overlay. Again, this is new for Maxwell 3. I'm not going to overlay any text over my screen. And then file, I just have this set to automatic so that it sends out an MXS and an MXI file so that I can, again, work with multi-light. So that's important. I don't want to have this set to image only. If I do that, I won't have multi-light control. All right, that's it. Let's go ahead and click Render, and I will see you in Maxwell. Okay, so here we are in Maxwell Render, and all that I've done is just let it start up here, and it went through its normal startup routine of loading the geometry and loading the lights and figuring everything out before it starts rendering. And I have a little preview going down here. Now, one of the other cool things that's happened with Maxwell version 3 is fast multi-light preview. And so here's our standard multi-light controls down here. And you can see for every one of those emitter materials I had set up, the same names have been passed along to Maxwell Render, and I now get these sliders where it allows me to control the intensity of the lighting. And one of the options in Form Z was lighting intensity plus color. And so if I had chosen that, I would actually have a color chip down here as well. Those files are much larger because it's actually rendering color and intensity data into each light, and that takes up a lot more headroom. In this case, I just did intensity because I'm fine with the color of the lights that I pass through the materials in Form Z itself. And all I really want to do is control the overall intensity of each one of my sets of lights. So right now they're kind of at full intensity. And you can see here in the little preview that all the lights are very bright in there, or maybe some of them aren't even bright enough. But that's why I like to render with multi-light, because it allows me to control that either during or after the rendering. Now, real quick, back to fast multi-light preview. Without fast multi-light preview, this is the same as in Maxwell version 2. Let's find a set of lights here. Glowing lights is going to be the one I'm going to look at here. And those are the overhead lights in the scene, these big strip lights. And you can see I can control the intensity of those lights. I could turn them off, or I could turn them up. Okay, so by default, I think they were at about 3,000. I'm just going to type that back in. You can see I really can't see the seating down here in the main part of the room. If I turn that up, though, I can start to see that. Now, this is a very tiny preview, and this is what they've addressed in the latest version of Maxwell Render version 3. If you go into the preferences, you can turn on fast multi-light preview. And when you do that, it switches this over to GPU mode. Okay, so you really do need a good graphics processing unit in your computer to be able to handle this and manipulate these in real time. Okay, so I would recommend a card with at least a gigabyte of memory on it, if not more. All right, and you can see right now, just by turning that on, it's kind of rethinking everything here. And okay, now we're set here into fast multi-light preview mode. And so watch what happens now when I adjust glowing lights. See, I can pull this down, and it actually adjusts right here in the big window. All right, so that's what fast multi-light preview allows you to do. Now, my graphics card only has a gig of memory, whereas some of my other computers have more. It just happens that this one only has a gig. So this kind of thing isn't, again, super fast on this computer, but if you have one with a better GPU, it's going to be even faster. But I really think this has been a great update for Maxwell 3 versus doing it down here in the little preview window. I get to see the effect of these things right away. So what I'm going to do now is just let this render for a while. You can see up here, I'm 4 minutes into it. I'm at SL2, and if I let it run the whole 3000, you know, I've got another 44 hours left if I wanted to let it run all the way through to the very end, 100%. So I'm just going to get it to a point, and I'm going to hit stop. And when I do that, it's going to be good enough. So I'll wait till it gets good enough. And then I'm going to go ahead and adjust these lights again before I save out my final image. All right? So I'll see you back here in a little bit. All right, so we're back, and you can see here that the render's really cleared up, and you can see that this particular one took about 26 hours at this speed and got up to SL16. So I stopped it then. And, you know, that's typically how I work, is I just let it render overnight, or, you know, it's on another computer while I'm working on something else somewhere else. So anyway, you can see here that I've gone through and I've adjusted my lighting as well. So, you know, just tweaking these numbers, and again, you can just pull them down, and you can see the effect of them right in the scene with multi-light and with fast multi-light preview. So you can tweak these however you want. So you can see I've got box boom lights separated out. I've got cove lights right up underneath this section right here. And you can see this rendering, I didn't point this out before, but this is a spherical panorama. You can see it's severely warped, and you can see this seam right here matches up with the seam over here. So what it's going to do is wrap this around us like a sphere. It's basically going to spherically map this to a sphere, and we're going to be able to stand inside of it. And you can see right now I'm looking straight at the stage, which is that initial viewpoint that I set when I was in Form Z. And again, that doesn't matter. I could have been looking any direction because it's a 360-degree sphere around us. It doesn't matter as long as my view is flat. That's probably the biggest thing. So I can go through again and just, you know, tweak all these things. And, you know, if I wanted to turn those down and turn these down and see what would this thing look like during a performance, you know, I might turn this off. I might turn the cove light off. I'll turn the upper lights down up over the balcony, and I even have more lights over here if I scroll over to the right. I've got the rear up light, which is this little guy right back here, so I can pull that thing down. And it's kind of calcing all this on the fly. Now the darker I make this image right now, I might see a little bit of noise start to show up, and you can see it back here because the lighting in the control room is on, and it's so dark in the room that there is a little bit of noise. So, you know, again, you can clear that up with different ways to do that. You know, one of them is just wait a lot longer, but there's lots of different ways to do these things. So once you're happy with your multi-light setup, you can go ahead and save this image again. So Maxwell by default is saving the image that it renders, and you'll get that one no matter what. But what you can do is you can click the little hard disk platter icon up here for image and save that and find a place to save it. So let's call this Pano Dark. And I'm just going to save it, and it's going to save it with whatever was set up over here in the channel. So you can see this is set up to be a PNG 16-bit. You can choose 16 or 8 bits. 16 gives you more color depth. 8 is good enough for what we're going to use it for. So I'm going to stick with 8 and say OK. And then I do not want to embed the channels in the image. Sometimes that looks a little funky, and I'm not going to process this any further. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and click No. I'm not going to embed the channels. It's just going to give me a straight image, which will be fine. Now, just to give you an idea of how big the file is for these multi-light preview files, I'm going to go ahead and hide Maxwell. And let's see here. Here's my adjusted lighting file that I made. You can see that's 1.5 GB, that MXI file that has all that information stored in it. It gets quite a bit bigger once you do color plus intensity for multi-light, where a standard MXI file is going to be nowhere near that size. So you do have to watch out. These things start to take up a lot of space, and once you get the image you want, you might want to go back and clean out these files. Okay. Now the last thing I'm going to do is, I'm using Pathfinder here, so I have 2 Finder windows open at the same time. On this side, I'm going to go over to Dropbox, Documents, Projects. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder here and just call this my theater. And I'm going to go ahead and drop my PNG file that I just saved, Pano Dark, into there. And I'm going to save a couple in there actually. So I'm going to drag that file, if I can see it here. There we go. I made that so wide I couldn't even read it. So I'm going to drag Pano Dark over there, copy that onto my Dropbox, and let's see. Let's grab one more. Okay, this is a good one. I'm going to drag that in there as well. Okay, so I have 2 different ones. I've got the first one. If I open that up with Quick View here, you can see the lighting. It's all adjusted. I saved that image out separately already. I adjusted all my lighting levels down in the orchestra pit and the spotlights and, you know, the uplights and the downlights and everywhere. Okay, so this is kind of a house lights on kind of an image. And then I've got this new one, which is the dark version. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take both of those on my Dropbox here, and I'm going to open those up on an app on the iPad. So I'm going to open up my iPad now, and I'll be back in just a second for that. All right, so here we are on the iPad, and I have this app called iPano. So I'm going to open that up by tapping on it, and you can see here that it's a little bit sideways, but what happens is I'm holding my iPad in my hands, and so I'm mirroring it to my computer here. So you can see I'm inside this space. All right, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tap on the screen, double tap I guess, and I'm going to flip this over. There we go. And I'm going to tap the icon in the upper left-hand corner. And again, this app is called iPano, and I think it's $3. I'll put a link to it below the video. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to go down here to the bottom and say Open from Dropbox. Okay, fast way to get images over here onto the iPad. So let's go Documents, Projects, Theater, and let's put this one on there. And it's going to load it in. Okay. It's loading it onto the iPad right now. You can see the progress bar. Okay, so now check it out. I'm just moving my iPad around, and I can hold it any direction. So what I'm going to do here, actually, I'm going to turn my iPad sideways again. And I can look up and around, and it's so cool to see the face of your client when they're standing inside their space. Now, the other thing they can do is they can just set their iPad down on the table, and they can spin through this with their fingers. Okay, so I'm just using my finger to swipe around. But if you want to look up, you have to pick the iPad up and look at the ceiling. And I just think, and they look at this and they're like, whoa, this is so awesome for them to be able to do. And for $3, this is a crazy alternative to the other applications that are available out there on the computer, which are about $100. And I'll put some links to those below the video as well. But this is an incredibly cheap, you know, if you take away the cost of the iPad, it's an incredibly cheap way to get your client inside your project and have them check it out before it's built. You know, you just have a digital model, and thanks to Maxwell Render's spherical rendering lens and the photorealism that you can achieve with Maxwell Render, it's totally amazing. So I know you can't really see me right now, but I'm spinning around in my chair holding this up, and it's using the gyroscope inside the iPad to know which direction I'm tilting this thing around. So I can make you sick real quick by doing this, but when you're holding it right in front of your face, it's so awesome to kind of look through a magic window of the iPad and see their face kind of light up as they move around inside the space. All right. So one other thing you can do when you're in iPano is, again, double tap on the screen, and you want to click or tap the button in the upper right hand corner which is the export button. And the thing that I like to do is go down here in the bottom and say save to iPano documents, this guy right here. Okay, if you do that, you no longer have to be worried about being connected to the internet to load the Pano file, the image, into the app on the iPad. If you just save it to that, you saw the little animation, it kind of flew away. So now I can hit the little open and I can say open iPano document, and it's saved locally on my device. All right, and you can see I've got several in here from different projects. And that's it. So now I can just tap on the one that I want to open up, and there it is. I'm inside the space, and it's on my device, and I never have to worry again about being connected, or having a connection to wireless or a cell signal or whatever to actually get to my panoramas. So you can have multiple panoramas inside the same project. You can hook up your iPad to a projector so everybody else in the room can see what the person who's holding it sees. You could load your panoramas up onto multiple iPads and just hand them out to different people sitting around the table, and it gets real fun real fast. All right, so check the links below the video for all the things that I've talked about in here, and give it a try. I'd love to see what you come up with, and go ahead and leave me some imagery, post it online, leave a link to it in the comments so that everybody can see it. That would be awesome. All right, so I hope you learned a lot. If you did, I would really appreciate you tipping me in the tip jar, which you can click the button below this video. I really appreciate it. It allows me to make more tutorials for the website. So please donate to the website and keep it going. Again, this is Evan at getmethod.com, and I hope you learned something great today. Go ahead and leave me a comment and tell me what you're up to. I'll see you on the next Methodcast. Bye-bye.